Okay. It's real nice to be asked down here. As I told telling some of the guys in the cars today that my wife and I came down here in 2019 for a couple days of goofing around. I'm in the music business, so duh, come to Florence, Tuscumbia, toured Fame and Muscle Shoals Sound and the Alabama Music Hall of Fame, which is fantastic. And then I'm a Frank Lloyd Wright nut as well, being from the Chicago area where Frank Lloyd Wright had his early studio in Oak Park. And to see the Usonian house here and just eat some great food and have a great time. So we're sitting in the hotel room. We stayed in the Tuscumbia side of the river. And my wife's, I'm looking on the phone and she goes, "What are you doing?" So I'm trying to find who the local historian is. That's just what I do. Come to a new area that I haven't been to before, try to find the local historian. So I find David. It's David's name. And I find that he's at this church and I find out where the church is. Says, "Well, what are we going to do? We're going to eat breakfast at Two Fat Sisters," which we did today. And I've turned many friends of mine onto Two Fat Sisters that don't live even north or south of the Ohio River. They come to Two Fat Sisters, and I was just in Birmingham on business this past weekend, and we drive out to his church and thinking maybe like the church secretary might be there, maybe David's there. Nope. And I said, okay, I'll find out his email and send him an email. We had him up to speak to Clarksville and Nashville roundtables a couple of years ago. It was really nice to have him up and because the Shoals area is a fascinating place. And thank you, Greg, and everybody for taking me around today. It was an incredible time. A lot of places I had not been to, driving by places. Oh, I remember that as I zoom by. But it was great fun, and I'm sure my suntan looks a lot better than it did yesterday because I forgot to wear my hat. But we're going to learn about the war in the Western Theater in about an hour, maybe a little less than an hour. And the focus is going to be Nashville as the siren song of the Western Confederacy. You all know the Iliad and the Odyssey of Homer, Homeric Greece. I'm a big ancient Greece historian. I've got about 20 books on the Greeks, particularly if they're the Spartans. Because I think the Greeks still have a lot to teach us today. And the Homer thing about the Odyssey coming back to Greece after the defeat of the Trojans, and I forget how many years it took to do that. But keep in mind, navigation back then was line of sight. You looked at the land. You didn't, let's go across the ocean and see what happens. You look, there's the land, and there's more land, and we're never leaving sight of the land. And it took them, I don't know, several years to get back from Troy to Greece. Look at it on the map. This is Turkey to Greece. It's not very far, but then would ruin the whole story of Homer, wouldn't it? And he was told, Ulysses or Odysseus, was told about the island of the Sirens, and the Sirens would sing these sweet songs and lure mariners to their doom on the rocks of the island that they lived on. So as the story goes, if you read Homer, here we are at 800 BC, there's Odysseus or Ulysses tied to the mast with no wax in his ear so he can hear the music of the Sirens, who, by the way, were not nice-looking naked women like in the first part. They were birds with the heads of women, according to what Homer's book says. So they flew around and looked pretty. And all the sailors are oblivious to this because they have wax in their ears, and they can't hear it. So they were not lured to the rocks of destruction around the island of the Sirens. So this is a lure, if you will, that I'm going to do a parallel about what happened in the Western Theater. If you don't, particularly for the Confederates, if you don't like my allegory of Homer, how about Nashville, the Klingon tractor beam of the Confederacy? I'm a Star Trek fan. The Klingons, first of all, the Bird of Prey warship was awesome. Second of all, how the heck did they get tractor beam technology over the Federation to cause havoc with the Enterprise, et cetera, et cetera. So, but the same thing is luring you in to destruction, which is what the tractor beam would do. So Tennessee is an important place for the Civil War. There's only, and I'm not just saying this because I live there, I'm an Illinois native, but because Tennessee and Kentucky are right in the middle of the Western Theater, and they're the only two states of the Confederacy, Kentucky, of course, doesn't secede, that border the Eastern Theater. I want to make sure which one of the, wrong one. There's supposed to be a red, I'm not going to look at this because I'll go blind. Somewhere up here, there's a laser beam. How does a laser beam work?
It's that middle button, isn't it?
The middle button. There we go. Thank you. The one that looks like a laser button. Yeah. That one. That button. So here's Virginia in the insignificant Eastern Theater where nothing happens for 4.5 years except two armies bash each other. And then we have the heartland of the Confederacy, as the late Thomas Connolly called it correctly, agricultural industrial heartland of the Confederacy. By the way, we were talking about agriculture in Alabama's and ports. There's a great book I would commend you, because I'm big into logistics, called Confederate Industry by, I think it's Harold Wilson, and he talks about Alabama as a case study for the building up of the industrial base of the Confederacy. Before it was basically Northerners coming down here starting these places, and then they served the Confederacy during the war. So you got Kentucky, Tennessee, Eastern Theater over here, and the Trans-Mississippi Theater. So it borders, it's in one theater and borders the other two. So geographically, both of these places are going to be targets. And you see, after the Confederates move up and take Columbus, Kentucky, and Hickman, Kentucky in early September of 1861, Grant moves from Cairo to take Smithland and Paducah, which is the mouths of the confluence, I should say, of the Ohio and Tennessee rivers, and the Ohio and Cumberland rivers. I live in Clarksville, right there on the banks of the Cumberland. And the whole thing starts actually in Camp Dick Robinson. So I am here to absolve Bishop Polk of violating the Kentucky stated neutrality. Kentucky in May of 1861 declared itself neutral. The Kentucky State Guard, which was probably the best equipped and drilled militia in the United States, think blue blood horse money, lots of it. Bearskin shakos like Napoleon's Old Guard, imported Enfield rifles from Britain in 1860. They had the checkbook, so they could buy whatever the heck they wanted to equip these troops. Their mission were to keep the northern troops out and the southern troops out. If you were a Unionist and you wanted to join the Union Army, you went to Jeffersonville, Indiana, across from Louisville, or you went outside Cincinnati, Ohio. If you were a Confederate sympathizer and you wanted to join, you came down here to Clarksville, where Camp Burnett and Camp Boone were, or over here to West Tennessee around Union City. And both sides pretty much kept to that. And the whole thing that starts this is in April of 61, Beriah McGoffin, the governor of Kentucky, was a pro-Southern governor, and he dealt with a pro-Northern legislature. And he sends the 1st Kentucky Confederate to Virginia. They're there for the Manassas campaign, but they're not in the battle. They're guarding the railroad yard at Manassas Junction. And that makes the legislature really mad. So they will form, a couple months later, the Kentucky Home Guard. Now, the constitutional commander of a state's military forces is who? The governor. Your governor, it's Kay, what's her name, Kay what? Kay Ivey, is the constitutional commander of the Alabama National Guard until they're federalized. My governor, Governor Lee, is the constitutional commander of the Tennessee National Guard until they're federalized. So now you have Governor McGoffin controlling the Kentucky State Guard, who were mostly pro-Confederate, but you had pockets of Unionists, and the state legislature now commanding the Home Guard. Do we see a problem starting to happen? Because there is going to be a problem starting to happen. And what happens is, in 1st of August, the Union Kentuckians start to form regiments at Camp Dick Robinson outside of Lexington. McGoffin and Lincoln have been exchanging telegrams back and forth about the neutrality thing. Lincoln initially pledges to keep Kentucky neutral. And then when Camp Dick Robinson happened, McGoffin fires him off an email and says, hey, what's going on? I thought you said you're going to keep Union troops out of Kentucky. I'm keeping the Confederate guys out of Kentucky. And Lincoln sends an email back and basically says, I can't believe you're upset that Kentucky men would form to defend their state. They're not forming to defend their state. They're forming to fight for the Union. He also didn't tell McGoffin there were 2 Tennessee Union regiments forming there, the 1st and 2nd Tennessee United States. And those are guys that are coming out of the mess that's going to be East Tennessee and getting in dribs and drabs through the mountain passes up to Camp Dick Robinson. Lincoln conveniently left that part out of the telegram. 3 weeks later is when Polk moves to Columbus, Kentucky. Kentucky's neutrality is a house of cards. It's coming down anyway, just which side pushes it first. So Grant's going to win the positioning battle by taking the mouths of the rivers. The high bluffs on the first Chickasaw Bluff there is about 200 feet above the river. It'll have 3 layers of heavy guns, 142 pieces of heavy artillery to cork up the bottle. So the Mississippi River and the Ohio River and the Missouri River coming up this way, I've told them today, I've led tours of Cairo. 50% of the water that flows in the United States flows past Cairo, Illinois. 50%. That's a lot of water. And if you are a Minnesota farmer, an Iowa farmer, an Illinois farmer, Wisconsin farmer, and you're not close to a railroad hub, how do you get your crops to market? You get them on a boat down to New Orleans, and from New Orleans, ocean-going ships to feed the world. New Orleans then was the #1 export port in the United States. It's in the top 3 today. Living on the Cumberland River, you guys live on the Tennessee River. What do we see? Barges, right? Tows and barges going up and down the river. Come up the Ohio and Mississippi, you'll see towboats pushing 40 to 50 barges on the Mississippi River and the Ohio River. You'll see 100 to 200 towboats or barges at Cairo at any given time. And it's amazing. I had the Cleveland Roundtable down there some years ago for the tour that I did, and they were stunned at the barge traffic on the river because they're used to seeing the ore boats and the grain ships on the Great Lakes, like I am being from Chicago. We used to see the grain boats docking in off the lakefront. But the amount of traffic today that moves on the water is immense in the interior of the United States. Why? Because it's cheaper to ship by water than any other way. You can put more on a ship or a barge than a truck or a railroad car or the backseat of my Honda CRV. So these farmers up here are getting on the phone to their congressmen and saying, we can't get our crops to market. How are you going to get that river open for us, or we're going to starve? So that rolls uphill to the President of the United States, and Abraham Lincoln, having been on a flatboat as a young man, realizes that opening the Mississippi River is going to be vital, and that's where he will tweak Winfield Scott's Anaconda plan of blockading the coast and then having an offensive up from the southern end and the northern end to open up the Mississippi River and the tributaries, the Tennessee and the Cumberland. So that will kind of set the stage. Fort Donelson will fall on February 16th, 1862, 13,000 prisoners. Clarksville, where I live, falls 3 days later. It was completely abandoned. And then Don Carlos Buell here with the Army of the Ohio will show up opposite Nashville. How many of you all been to Nashville? You know where the Titans football stadium is? Soon to be the ex-Titans football stadium, unfortunately. That was a separate town called Edgefield. So Buell is camped in Edgefield for several days, and he's waiting for a gunboat to show up. It's the Cairo that shows up, leading some transports and more troops. And finally, he marches his troops across the river. They destroyed the suspension bridge there, and he lays a pontoon bridge and into the state capitol, which is still our state capitol today, into the town square there, right off the foot of the main bridge. The 6th Ohio Infantry will hoist their national colors above the state capitol. Out of the crowd will come an elderly man who's a retired sea captain, and he's got a folded up wool bunting flag. When you open it up, it's got an anchor in the corner, and he gives it to the Union colonel in charge and says, here, this flag is a lot bigger, and that is he says, I call this, by the way, Old Glory. That's where our name for our flag comes from, is this gentleman giving Old Glory to be hoisted above the Capitol at Nashville. It becomes the Union's second largest supply depot in the West after Louisville. Here's the Gulch area. That's uphill to the Capitol building. Doesn't look like this now. You got $1 million condos and tall buildings there. The railroad is elevated, but that's the Gulch area. Here's Fort Negley, where the Nashville Civil War Roundtable meets right now. So we hurry, we can make it. And then here's the riverfront. So it's just sloping down to the river. And then there's warehouses and all kinds of buildings there. And then there's the railroad bridge, which is a turn bridge in the middle. And you can see what the Union's doing. They're going to fortify Nashville. So they make this a fortified bridge with guard towers. The gates will close. You got rifle slots in the side wood there. And those piers are still used today on the modern railroad bridge. So they're going to fortify the heck out of Nashville and start building huge depot buildings there, which is going to make it a big, big target. So after the fall of Forts Henry and Donelson, the Confederate defense line that had gone from Cumberland Gap over here up to Bowling Green, Kentucky, down to Russellville, Clarksville, Fort Henry, Donelson, to Columbus, Kentucky, has totally collapsed. Goes from here down to here. The cheapest land grab the Union makes of the entire Civil War in terms of human life and casualties. The Confederates will still, for a time, hold West Tennessee until June, when the Confederate Naval Squadron is utterly destroyed before the home crowd up on the bluffs, cheering their sailors on, and then watching 7 of the 8 boats get rammed and sunk and captured and things of that nature. There went the popcorn sales that day and the hot dog sales. And then you can see the Federals will start pushing troops down this way. Grant will take what's now called the Army of the Tennessee to Pittsburgh Landing. Buell has come down from Louisville, grabs Nashville, and will start sending troops to northern Alabama. Ormsby Mitchell's campaign, as Buell sends divisions to help Grant at Shiloh, Ormsby Mitchell comes from Fayetteville over the mountains, and he'll capture Athens and Huntsville and other places, and that's where the Athens Urban Renewal Project takes place. When John Basil Turchin, better known as Ivan Vasilyevich Turchinov, the Russian Thunderbolt, tells his men, I turn mine back for 30 minutes, and they pretty much lay waste to the town because that's what Russians do. If you don't believe me, look at the war in Ukraine. They still do it. I think it's in their DNA. So that's the situation. So Tennessee being the last state to leave the Union on June 8th of 1861, the morale of civilians and the military falls to a new low. The government is in the saddle wherever Brian McGoffin and the wagons carrying the papers of the government of the state of Tennessee. They'll end up in Memphis for a time. But the fall of Nashville will set into motion Confederate strategy in the West for the rest of the war. And after studying the Western theater for a number of years, this finally dawned on my aging brain about 15 years ago. Like, you know what? Duh. Nashville is the Klingon tractor beam. If the Confederates can retake the capital, they can probably capture the rest of the state. They can start an offensive into Kentucky, but no less than 5 times will the Confederate States of America's military arm in the Western theater try to capture Nashville, either marching on it or marching around it and trying to pull Union forces out of Middle Tennessee entirely. This is like, I'm a big Georgia Bulldogs fan, sorry. Sorry. Mark Richt, our former coach, I don't have a shot of Kirby Smart talking to Satan. So you're all SEC fans, you know who Satan is, right? Yeah, there we go. I do this up north, people are like, what's he talking about? Who's that guy with the other? Come on, dude, it's Steve Spurrier, Satan. You get it? That's like Mark Richt walking across the field before the game to Satan and say, here's our defensive playbook, here's our offensive playbook, see you in an hour of playtime. Or Alabama-Auburn or Alabama-Michigan. I was pulling for you guys against Michigan. What up? I had to put up those Big Ten fans when I lived in Ohio. I really was. I go Tide, go Tide. And like, what? Yeah. Let's hike the ball. Was that 3 times at least? 2 times I know of? So that's the same thing. It's like the Confederates walking up to Buell and Grant saying, here's the playbook for the next couple of years. Let's see how it goes. Same thing, same kind of a concept. So the Empire Strikes Back, Part 1, Shiloh. Albert Sidney Johnston, the theater commander of Department No. 2, has been totally embarrassed by the debacle of Forts Henry and Donelson. I mean, he is being shredded in the newspapers. Keep in mind, he is the No. 2 ranking Confederate full general, a rank that was created in September 1861 by the Confederate Congress. Prior to that, nothing higher than brigadier. Who's No. 1? Nobody gets it, so don't feel bad. Boom! Somebody got it. Samuel Cooper, Adjutant General of the United States Army, now Adjutant General of the Confederate Army. Sidney Johnson 2, Lee is 3rd, and then, hope I get this right, Johnston, then Beauregard. And Johnston thought he should be it, and Richard McMurray goes into that in his new book, by the way, which really explains a lot about why Johnston doesn't get up there. But Grant is moved south to Pittsburgh Landing with his new Army of the Tennessee, gone from 3 divisions at Donelson to 6 divisions here, and he camps at Pittsburgh Landing. And Sidney Johnson is itching to get his reputation back. Tim Smith's new biography, by the way, on Sidney Johnson is really good, really worth reading, and goes into a lot of what makes Sidney Johnson's head tick. So the Confederates realize, Jeff Davis realizes, okay, we're going to launch a counteroffensive and we're going to destroy Grant, who's now hung way down the line. Keep in mind, Grant and Halleck, his boss, are not buds. They're not seeing eye to eye on a number of things. Grant almost gets fired during the Fort Donelson campaign. He will get fired temporarily after this campaign because of Halleck just trying to stab him in the back the whole time. When I do Army staff rides at Fort Donelson, I talk to these military officers. What would you feel like if you're doing your job and your superior officer is stabbing you in the back and you find out about it? That's not unity of command, one of the 9 principles of war. So the Confederates look at this as an opportunity. They'll pull Van Dorn and Price over from the Transmiss. They don't get there till after the Battle of Shiloh. Ruggles comes up, Bragg comes up from Mobile and Pensacola. This is the Army of Central Kentucky coming down from Bowling Green. Beauregard and Polk come down from Columbus, Kentucky. Polk will finally obey the order to retreat. He's told to send troops to Fort Donelson and starts his long career of disobeying orders he doesn't like. And you can see where they're massing. They're going to Corinth, Mississippi, right there, to build the new Army of the Mississippi. By the way, about 1,000 Donelson guys get out of the fort and will join up with these troops here. So one of my great what ifs is, what if the garrison breaks out, where they're going to go? They're going to go to Corinth to join this new army. So the plan is to mass this new army and move forward and destroy Grant on the banks of the Tennessee River. Beauregard writes the battle plan. It is a faulty battle plan, which we'll get to in a bit. And as they march up, you can see the columns of march leaving Corinth. Cheatham's coming down still from Purdy. The Homburg-Purdy Road, the Ridge Road. Tim Smith's book on Shiloh goes into great detail. And the plan is to mass your troops here, shove them away from the river into the bowels of the creek over here, which is a very swampy area even today. Great plan, all right? It's actually a very good plan. But Beauregard's tactical deployment puts most of the combat power in the center of the line and the left of the line, and 2 brigades on the right of the line. You're not going to shove anybody into the bowels of the swamps up that way if you're putting all your combat power over here as opposed to here, because it's supposed to be a left wheel turn and destroying Grant in sight before he can get reinforced. Doesn't work. We all know what happens. The second day, Grant gets reinforced by some of Buell's troops and launches a counterattack. Forrest is out there doing scouting, saying they're landing lots of blue guys coming across the river. They don't pay attention. So the Confederates will now fall back to Corinth. And Sidney Johnson, of course, is killed. Beauregard rises to command the army. He's got health issues at this time. He will leave the army in June without kind of telling anybody. And the next guy in command will be Braxton Bragg. So Beauregard leaves in June. And what is happening here is this giant army that will take Corinth by the Federals. When Halleck comes down, he'll take Pope's Army of Mississippi that just won at New Madrid and Island number 10, join them here with Buell's army, minus the division of George Morgan. Where's Cumberland Gap? Right there. George Morgan's here. He's got Ormsby Mitchell down here. And this is like a 125,000 man army, and we'll start marching from Pittsburgh Landing on Corinth. And they're having to corduroy the roads. Have you driven from Shiloh to Corinth? Imagine what it was like 160 years ago. Get Tom Parson down here and talk about this sometime. He'll talk. He says, cut Buell cut Halleck some slack. He's having to corduroy roads to get his troops down there. So the Confederates see what's going on. Corinth has got health issues. The water's not good. Sickness is rising up, so they will start to fall back down the railroad. In the meantime, this army will start breaking up. Part goes to Memphis. The other parts particularly Mitchell's troops, start to threaten Chattanooga, which causes a major problem because there's maybe 2,000 guys in Chattanooga. And Ormsby Mitchell's division is 9,000 troops headed off that way. Big problems potentially for the Confederacy. So this is a really, really good plan. The Confederates get reinforced again. Bragg is in command at Tupelo. I've not found any documentation yet, but they were at Tupelo. I've heard rumors that they were passing the hat trying to figure out where Elvis Presley was going to be born, figure out what house it was going to be. He'll be born here. No, I'll put 20 on that house over there. A lot of people don't realize that Elvis is from Tupelo. And start to come up with a plan. And people like to bang on Braxton Bragg as a tactician. I'm in that camp too. Bragg does not fight a battle tactically very well. As a strategist, he's very gifted. Larry Hewitt, the historian, is the guy that turned me on to this, and I've done a lot more thinking about it. So what Bragg is going to do, people think that Bragg comes up with the idea of the Kentucky campaign. It's Edmund Kirby Smith over in Knoxville, it does. And he says, I'm going to take my army of Kentucky into Kentucky. Why don't you come along? Cover my left flank, we'll have a 2-prong assault. Then they're going to add a 3rd prong of Humphrey Marshall's troops coming out of the toe of Virginia. And then you're going to have Price and Van Dorn, who are over here in northern Mississippi, could move into Tennessee here and pin down Grant and Sherman so they can't send reinforcements to Buell. Great plan. Great plan. And while Bragg is saying, okay, I'm on board with that, he will leave troops to make sure he holds northern Mississippi and protects it. And by extension, this part of northern Alabama along the Memphis and Charleston Railroad. So Bragg is showing a gift of, I can cover certain things, I'm going to go and help Kirby Smith, and off we go. So Smith's the guy that does it, so you can see Van Dorn and Price will be here. Bragg's infantry goes down here to Mobile, crosses the bay, takes the railroad up to Atlanta, to Chattanooga, and moves up over the Cumberland Plateau at Sparta. And then Kirby Smith has already gone in August. In fact, he's already won the Battle of Richmond, Kentucky, where he destroys a Union army up there, captures Lexington, and gets up towards Frankfort, starts to threaten Cincinnati. That's where these forts on the Kentucky side of the river of Cincinnati, Fort Wright, Fort Mitchell, Fort Thomas, all get built. They're basically grabbing guys. Can you take a shovel? Great, because you're going over to Kentucky to build forts. And some of those forts are still there today, if you know where to go for them. So then Bragg's cavalry and artillery comes across northern Alabama, and then we'll join up. So you've got a nice two-prong invasion, and Marshall comes out of here with about 4,000 guys. The plan is to cut Buell off from Louisville, and Bragg will do that. He will get across the river at Munfordville and hold the Green River Valley, which is a very steep canyon, and bag a 4,000-man garrison, commanded by John Wilder, by the way, before he's in the Lightning Brigade, and move on up to join with Kirby Smith and head off into the bluegrass part of the state. Meanwhile, Buell marches out of Nashville with the bulk of his troops. He leaves two divisions, one division at least, James Negley's division I know was there, and pulls out with the bulk of his army and marches around Munfordville, makes it to Louisville, and then starts to turn towards the east. The Confederates will install a new governor in Frankfort, and who will deliver the shortest acceptance speech of any political figure in American history. While he's delivering his speech, being the new governor, Confederate governor of Kentucky, Buell's artillery, have you been to Frankfort? It's in a bowl on the Kentucky River, and there's big bluffs around it. There's Union artillery up there going, wow, look at those guys down there. Fire. You know, I hereby swear to be the new governor of Kentucky, and I'll do a great job, but we really got to get going. As the shells start blasting all. It was kind of an embarrassing situation. If you're going to install a new governor, make sure you can kind of stick around to give the governor some support. The problem with this campaign is, even though Bragg outranks Kirby Smith, he can't tell Kirby Smith what to do, because Kirby Smith's a department commander, Department of East Tennessee. Bragg is a department commander. Smith can't tell Bragg what to do. Van Dorn and Price, Sterling Price and Earl Van Dorn down here, are under Bragg. Humphrey Marshall's not under any of these guys because he's coming out of Virginia. Do we see a problem here if you're doing like a multi-prong offensive that had incredible opportunity to pull out and to capture Nashville by maneuver? Because once you beat Buell, you're going to be able, Negley's toast. He's not going to be able to hold on to Nashville with one division. So Bragg will follow along as we've seen a little bit, and Smith gets up here, Bragg gets up here to Munfordville and moves on to try to go towards Bardstown to hook up with him. And despite the tactical victory in October at the Battle of Perryville, where he's outnumbered about 2.5 to 1, he will shove Buell's army back about 2 miles. It's a really, really good victory. Kirby Smith chooses, whatever reason, not to come and join Bragg. He requests it. Larry Hewitt showed that Smith and Bragg are sending communications to each other. Do you have communications from the president or the War Department where I obey your orders or you obey mine orders? If you do, please copy me with those orders. And they're both writing to each other going, I have no such orders from the president or the War Department. They don't have to cooperate. If you're smart, you cooperate, because that's the whole point of this campaign. They lose in terms of a strategic vision. Part of the reason why Bragg wants to go into Kentucky is John Hunt Morgan, John Breckinridge, and now Simon Buckner, who's been captured at Donelson, is back in the ranks by August, is telling him that if you go into Kentucky and hang around, you'll get 20,000 recruits in the Confederate Army. So they load up about 6,000 rifles into the wagons, hauling them up with them. They'll end up getting about 3,000 to 4,000. But the Kentuckians do not rise up. Why? Because their economy goes north of the Ohio River. If you're a Kentucky industrialist, if you're a Kentucky farmer, a Kentucky horse breeder, and the Confederate Army is not going to stick around to protect you, are you going to jump off the fence into the Confederate camp? No, you're going to straddle that fence. Larry Daniel, in his new book on the Army of Tennessee, it came out a couple years ago, said that 70% of Kentucky's military-age manpower did not fight in the Civil War for either side. That's hundreds of thousands of men that said no. Not even close. It's stunning, a stunning figure that he reported. So everybody's going to fall back, and the destination is going to be Murfreesboro. We were talking at dinner, if you're going to go into Kentucky, what Kentuckian, Buckner's obviously up there, Morgan's got a little bit to do with it. What Kentuckian do you really want to have on that campaign, and what body of troops do you want to have with you? You want John C. Breckinridge, former Vice President of the Confederacy, the highest ranking Kentuckian in the Confederate military, and the Orphan Brigade, who formed and trained outside of my town in Clarksville. They're not there. They're down in Baton Rouge with the CSS Arkansas trying to capture the capital of Louisiana back and getting beaten. Bragg could have left other troops down there to do that and brought Breckinridge and the orphans. I think, Greg, you were thinking that maybe that Bragg was worried about the orphans would desert. I think they're more interested in telling their people, we're here, come on, join the colors, we're here. I think that probably would have been more than happening than desertion. So Breckinridge, after being defeated down here, will end up at Murfreesboro to hold Murfreesboro in time to let the Army coalesce down in Murfreesboro.